All right, thank you everyone for being here. My name is Chris Speck. My degree was in counterterrorism and cybersecurity. So most of that degree is represented here, but not all of it. So before we start, I just want to say a couple thank yous. First off, to the entire INDS department for supporting me throughout my time here, not just with this project, but at UMBC in general with the degree and the program and everything like that. And specifically to Professor Stephen McAlpine for being there whenever I needed him to bounce questions off of and to come up with solutions to the many, many problems that surfaced during this. Then my degree mentors, Dr. Devin Haggerty and Brian Montgomery, who unfortunately couldn't be here, but they both gave me invaluable subject matter expertise and were always available for me to bounce questions off of whenever I needed. So without all of them, this would not be possible. So before I get into the actual presentation, I just want to give a few statistics for you guys to think about. In 2016, which was only 2 years ago, there were over 25,000 people killed due to terrorist-related incidents. Now, these are men, women, and children. And if you boil that down, that comes to about 68 people per day. And if you go down a little bit further, 3 people every hour. So in the time it takes us to watch a movie, 6 people across the world would have died due to some type of terrorist-related incident. My capstone presentation is on mapping and analyzing terrorist attacks in Srinagar, Kashmir. Now, the goal of my research when I set out was to take past terrorist attack data from an online database that I'll get into later called START, which is from the University of Maryland's National Consortium for the Study of Terrorism and Response to Terrorism. And with this data, during a time frame of 10 years, so 1991 to 2000, take that and map this data using a geographical mapping system called ArcGIS, which allows you to take points and GPS locations and georeferencing and all these other geographical functionality, and then take that map and use it to predict future attacks. Now, within this program, there's also a prediction algorithm, which I was planning to use. This is just a map of the region. Kashmir is a disputed territory between India and Pakistan, and it's at the northern tip of India. Now, it's kind of hard to see, but this is the border of Kashmir, actually. This was the most detailed map I could find from a reliable source. I apologize for the complexity of it. Once I began going through the process of trying to actually map the data that I gathered, I ran into a couple major problems. The first was the sheer size of the data that was available from this database. Now, in Srinagar alone, there was over 700 attacks present, so it was clear that I would have to limit this data in some way, and I'll go into that later on in the presentation. But perhaps the more problematic issue was the resolution of the data that was available. Now, previously in another INDS class, I did a study similar to this, except in Istanbul, Turkey. With that data, I was able to gather it, and each data point said, okay, it's in Istanbul, but also a district or a specific location. With this data set, unfortunately, there was no district or location. It just said in Srinagar. So obviously, you can't make a map of data points just randomly thrown throughout a city. So I was forced to move towards another form of analysis. And now this new research question, I guess you could say, was can the same past terrorist attack data from the same time span, 1991 to 2000, be used with a Bayesian analysis? So I introduced statistics to my project to then predict the forecast future characteristics of attacks. Now, the goal of this was similar but not exactly the same. Previously, it was to forecast attack locations, and now it kind of moved towards attack characteristics. And now the disciplines. Chief among these was political science. This kind of formed the overall overarching lens of the study in the fact that Kashmir is a disputed territory, like I said. And through the lens of international relations, I was able to really understand this dispute and the effects it might have on the data present. And obviously international relations is the study of the relations between countries, whether that be political, economic, and et cetera, and then the international community that those relationships form. And then along with this was statistics, which was the use of the Bayesian analysis, which I'll get into in another slide coming up. But this was how I was to analyze my data and create a meaningful prediction. And then for counterterrorism, while I didn't necessarily use any specific concepts from counterterrorism, the foundation of this study was based on counterterrorism efforts in the collection of data and the documentation of that data. So for my methodologies, this was probably one of the most difficult parts of it, in the fact that, like I said, I was presented with so much data that I had to figure out a way to limit its size. Now, even with the 10-year limitation, the 10-year window, I still had over 400 events, which was too many to include in a study like this. So I decided to limit this study from attack methodology and perpetrators. Now for attack methodology, I included 4, which was assassinations, armed assaults, bombings and explosions, which were kind of lumped together, and then unarmed assaults. And then for perpetrators, I included Hizbul Mujahideen, the Jammu and Kashmir Liberation Front, the Kashmir extremists, Muslim separatists, and then unknown cells, which actually, unsurprisingly, made up the majority of my data. Now this is just a quick screen capture of the actual database where I got all my attack data from. On the top it has all the filters and things like that you can see. So then for my methodologies, like I said, international relations is what really helped me to understand the situation in Kashmir, and more specifically Srinagar, which is the capital of the Indian-controlled portion of Kashmir. This discipline allowed me to see the potential effects of this disputed territory on the data that came out of it. So whether certain attacks were influenced by one nation or another, or some third-party organization. And then Bayes' theorem was instrumental in allowing me to analyze the data presented, and it's unique in the fact that it allows for prediction based on past events when taken into account with a specific set of evidence. So that allowed me to predict, or attempt to predict at least, the future terrorist attacks. So then for my methodologies in practice, international relations, again, helped me understand the situation in Kashmir. And more specifically, I use a theory of realism, which states that nations are out to look after for their own good, act in their own interests and their own national security. And in this situation, I think it was applicable in that both Pakistan and India are influenced in order to control this region for their own benefit, whether that be resources or land or whatever you want to come up with. And then again, the gathering of data, my quantitative data from this database was, again, one of my most important parts of this project, and one of the ones that took the most work, because I needed a data set that was robust enough that I could analyze it in a meaningful manner, but also didn't want to include any limitations that resulted in one or two events that would not necessarily have any impact on the study. So this is the Bayesian theorem. As you can see, it's the probability of an event based on prior knowledge of conditions that has to do with that event. Now I'm not going to read through this formula. You can see what it is. I color-coded it for these next slides to show exactly where each number comes from and the calculations. But the formula was based on the two most prominent perpetrating groups in the region, which was the Muslim separatists and then unknown. They made up the majority of the data. So as you can see, this is the prior information and then the evidence. So as I calculated the data, I went down by chart. So the prior was the first calculation I made, then that led into the second, and then the third and the fourth. And now, I'm not a statistician and didn't design this project to be stats, but the important thing in this is the posterior chart, in that you could say there's a 75.9% chance that a bombing or explosion could be or would be from an unknown group. And then those are just the rounded, here are the rounded variables. So for my scholarship of interdisciplinarity, I use an instrumental approach, which was a problem-based approach. And then political science and statistics both, like I said, applied in that I was able to understand the area and the effect that this relationship between the two countries would have, as well as the Bayesian analysis, which allowed for me to create a conclusion. And with this, I used the building complex multicultural explanation, which says, as Zach said earlier, you are taking parts of each discipline and combining them together to make a more effective and applicable design. So, in conclusion, the study was not able to answer my original question due to the fact that I wasn't able to actually map the data that I was given or that I collected, and that even with these statistical models and theorems, there's a lot of variability in the data, whether that be the actual groups or the calculations being made or the information being gathered. So it's difficult to predict future attacks. And in the future, I would include more data so that I had a more robust set of data that would allow for more variability in different calculations. And that's it.